A very warm welcome to everyone. We are joined by a special guest, Mr. Asher Ross, who is the Senior Strategist for NYIC Action. Welcome. So good to have you here with us.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your organization, NYIC.
Yeah. So NYIC Action is the C4 sister organization of the New York Immigration Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we are the political arm of a coalition of over 200 grassroots organizations across New York State that represent immigrant communities and communities of color. So NYIC Action can do partisan political work on behalf of the priorities of our coalition, and that includes endorsing and supporting candidates for election.
Okay, so what is your you mentioned endorsing candidates. What is your process?
So each year we have an endorsement process, whether it's for state, federal, or local office.
Mm-hmm.
We have a candidate questionnaire, and we also have a policy pledge, a policy platform pledge, which is a document that candidates have to sign if they want to be considered for our endorsement, where they agree to our policy positions for immigrant justice, and they agree to champion our issues while in campaigning and in office. So if a candidate signs our pledge, they fill out our questionnaire explaining their background, their connection to immigrant communities and immigrant organizations, and they explain their plan for immigrant justice in their district and in the state, then they can be considered for endorsement. And that process happens between January and March in general of each year.
Okay, so you mentioned your policy platform. Can you tell us what comprises that platform?
Yeah. So this year, since it's a local election year,
Mm-hmm.
and in New York City, the office is up for election on city council. We have what we call a 2023 Vision for New York City policy platform pledge. And essentially that is a vision and values statement for our organization, and to ensure that any candidate is trying to advance immigrant rights and immigrant power in the political process. It also goes into 5 policy areas as well, which include criminal justice, education, healthcare, democracy and voting rights, and housing.
Okay, so when a candidate signs your policy pledge, how do you, and they get your endorsement, how do you hold that candidate accountable, so to speak? Because, once they get it.
Yeah. So, signing our pledge puts people in the public record as supporting very specific principles, but also very specific policy goals and even legislation. So now we have a public record, and if someone doesn't follow through and fulfill their pledge, then we are able to publicize that information. And also, it's going to weigh heavily on whether we will endorse them again, or if we would endorse an opponent who could challenge them for office.
And of course, you will call them out.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So your policy pledge, does that include any bills that you champion, and can you give examples of that?
So I am not a policy, expert. I'm not in
Mm-hmm.
our policy department. The policy pledge does include several specific pieces of legislation. They include expanding language access. They include expanding funding for English language learning programs, for cultural competency in schools, and a lot more. So I wouldn't want to go into policy
Mm-hmm.
specifics and out of my area of expertise, but people can go and read our policy pledge on our website.
That I was going to ask you, where can they get more information to find out the list of candidates that you endorsed?
Sure.
And, generally?
People can go to www.nyicaction.org. And if you go to endorsements, if you go to where it says our work, and then endorsements, and then 2023 endorsements, it will show you the pledge right there. There'll be a button that takes you to the pledge. It also will show you who we've endorsed this year and each past year.
Okay, so Mr. Ross, you're the senior strategist, and you work with, you interact with the candidates, the organizations that's part of your coalition, and of course, regular people. What would be your words of wisdom, advice, so to speak, for the elections coming up, the primaries, that you want people to pay attention to, you'd like them to know?
Sure. I think that I want to just make people aware that in this particular election cycle, there are actually very few competitive Democratic primaries. There's very few competitive primary elections this year. There's several districts, including District 43 in South Brooklyn, District 9 in Upper Manhattan in Harlem, and District 26 in Long Island City that have competitive primaries. But in fact, there's very few viable primary challenges in this year's elections. We see a lot of incumbents running unopposed or without a viable opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And in this year's elections, the general election is going to be much more important than it typically is in New York City. There are 5 council districts that are actually going to have a viable Republican candidate running against a Democrat. And that includes in Queens, in the Bronx, and in Brooklyn. At least 5 districts that could potentially go from Democrat to Republican. So in November, we're going to see several very important races with candidates with very different positions on these issues.
And we saw some flipping happen in the last election.
That's
and
right.
People were surprised.
Yeah, we did. We saw a couple districts flip in Queens and in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have, and then also one in Bay Ridge and South Brooklyn that very nearly flipped for Justin Brannon. He's going to face a challenge this year, and there's several additional districts that are very competitive, and there's one in the Bronx as well, District 13, which will be competitive.
Okay, so once again, give out the website that people can get more information about your organization.
Sure. You can go to www.nyicaction.org for information about what we do, about our endorsement process, our policy pledge, who we've endorsed, etc. Oh, yeah, NYICaction.org. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much, Mr. Ross, and we look forward to having you back again.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.